Hey guys, it's Andrea. So today we're going to be discussing our first article is the Barbetta et al. 1993 Relative Effects of Whole Word and Phonetic Prompt Error Correction on the Acquisition and Maintenance of Sight Words by Students with Developmental Disabilities. So overall, it is important to provide feedback to students when they make errors, yet there's been very little research conducted on error correction. So this current study used whole word modeling and phonetic prompting following student errors during sight word instruction and compared the two. So technically, whole word modeling is if an individual says a whole word modeling is basically providing the entire prompt, the entire word. So if you hold up a sight word and you say, "What word is this?" And they don't know it, then you would say it's cat. What word? Cat, and you provide the whole word model. And then when using phonetic prompting, they actually break it down further on in the study. We'll discuss it, but they broke it down into 1, 2, or 3 syllables, and they have different levels on how many of the syllables that they provided as a prompt. And there are several reasons that they wanted to compare whole word prompting versus phonetic prompting. First, these are two of the most common strategies used in error correction. Yet past research comparing the two strategies has yielded conflicting results. And then second, systematic feedback is a component of the direct instruction model, but there is a positive correlation between direct instruction and student achievement. Yet there's not enough research that assesses the different components of direct instruction. So this study has attempted to provide additional research to assess the different components of direct instruction by looking at whole word prompts versus phonetic prompts for error correction. So the current study did replicate and extend the findings from the Espin and Dino 1989 article. While their data shows that whole word prompts are more effective, there were several limitations to the study, and so they wanted to further investigate if whole word prompts really are effective by addressing some of the limitations. So some of the limitations that they addressed is in the previous study they only used one set of words, so it's unknown if this would be effective with multiple sets, so we can have a stronger level of external validity. Will it generalize across sets? And then second, students were asked to read unknown words without prior modeling from the teacher. And so this can be challenging. You can imagine if you have phonetic prompts and you've never ever heard the word before in your life, how are you going to be able to figure out the rest of the word if you only have this phonetic prompt with 1 or 2 syllables? So the participants in the study were 3 females and 2 males with developmental disabilities, and the IQ scores ranged from 58 to 76. So they were, they scored as having an intellectual disability. The students were selected to participate in the study by their teacher, and sessions were held 5 days a week in the school, and each session lasted for 10 minutes. Each week, 14 unknown words were generated for each student from a pool of words identified from the teacher, and the students were tested with the words to ensure that they didn't know them ahead of time. So basically what they did is they presented the word to each child 2 times, and if the child engaged in an incorrect response both times, then that word was considered to be part of the study. If the child engaged in correctly identifying the word, then they did not use that in the study. And then the words were randomly assigned to one of the 2 conditions. So they randomly decided if it was going to get a whole word prompt error correction or if it was going to get a phonetic prompt error correction. So then they also added, which was not included in the study that they're extending, but they did an initial presentation. So the teacher sat in front of the student and presented the words to each student one at a time while reading it out loud. So they would present cat, dog, truck, and show the word to each student while saying it out loud. So they at least had some initial presentation to the word. And then they did instruction with error correction, and as mentioned before, it was either a whole word or phonetic prompt correction organized by the number of syllables. And then, so they started with a same-day test where no prompts were given. They just wanted to see, this is kind of another way for them saying that they conducted baseline procedures. And then they did a maintenance test after instruction that was identical to the same-day test. And I apologize, the same-day test is identical to follow-up. And so with the maintenance test, that was conducted 1 to 2 weeks after the study, and they wanted to see if the children maintained the words across time. And so they had several dependent measures in this study, kind of all depending on which part of the prompt level they were at, but they had number of words read correctly on same-day tests, number of words read correctly on next-day tests, percentage of words read correctly during instruction, and percentage of words read correctly during next day presentation during instruction, percentage of missed words read correctly following each of the 2 remedial prompts during instruction, and percentage of missed words read correctly following 2 remedial prompts. And then finally, percentage of words read correctly on 1 to 2 week maintenance sessions. They collected IOA, and the mean percentage of IOA was 99.6%. And let's go ahead and look at the results. We're going to look at the graphs. So you can see that they have students 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the closed-in circles are the whole word prompts, and the open circles are the phonetic prompts. It looks like they did an alternating treatments design, and you can see that overall, whole word prompts were more effective than phonetic prompts, and all of the students maintained the skills during maintenance probes. So this is similar to the previous study in stating that whole word prompts are more effective than phonetic prompts. So what's nice about whole word prompts is that, or whole word error correction, is that it does represent a low cost and simple to use tactic that can be easily incorporated into teacher-led classroom instruction. So this doesn't have to be a one-on-one treatment. This can be a treatment that you use with an entire classroom, and it is effective in teaching sight words. So we're going to move on to our second article, which is McDowell and Keenan, 2001. And so McDowell and Keenan, the article is Developing Fluency and Endurance in a Child Diagnosed with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or otherwise known as ADHD. And many children diagnosed with ADHD have difficulty sustaining attention to task-relevant stimuli and inhibiting responses to non-relevant stimuli. So in English, basically individuals who are diagnosed with ADHD have more difficulty staying on task and more difficulties completing a task as quickly as their other typically developing peers, more often because they're off task. So precision teaching is a general approach that involves repeated practice, error correction procedures, time drills, and the use of standard acceleration charts to display fluency skills, and fluency being defined as how accurately one can respond in a short amount of time. So one example of this maybe when you're using a standard acceleration chart, if you're using flashcards and you're trying to see how quickly an individual can get through a certain amount of flashcards, let's say within a minute, and you want to increase that fluency rate. So when I was getting my master's degree, we had what was called SAF meds, and it's say all fast something something something. I can't remember the rest of the acronym, but it's SAFMEDS, and it was all of the intro level terms to behavior analysis, and we had to see how many of the definitions we could how many we could say and how quickly we could say them within a minute. And the goal was to try and get our number as high as possible and increase our frequency. You can also, as they did here, do this with children. with different types. You can do it with sight words, you can do it with multiplication, and typically when using this, you're going to use a standard acceleration chart. And a standard acceleration chart is a type of graph that measures the fluency, and you have different levels that you want to get to within that standard acceleration chart. There is a floor effect and a ceiling effect on a standard acceleration chart, because obviously you can't respond less than 0, and there's only so fast that you can respond while doing fluency without sounding like an auctioneer. So the participant was a 9-year-old boy with ADHD, and the dependent variable was the number of letter sounds identified correctly and incorrectly per minute and the time spent on the task. So with the letter sounds, they did this with all of the letters of the alphabet, A through Z, and it would be A, B, K, and those were the letter sounds that he was having to learn. IOA was conducted for 17% of the sessions, and the agreement was 97%. During baseline, they timed his responses, but they didn't provide any instruction. They just laid out the letters and timed how quickly he could go through them and say the correct signs. And then during the intervention phase, they practiced sounding the letters, and he received instruction before the timing began. So each session was 10 minutes long, but they only timed him for they timed him for all 10 minutes, but then they only took the score for the highest minute that he got, and that was what was graphed on the standard acceleration chart. So let's go ahead and take a look at the graphs. So you can see here his on task. If we look at the second graph in figure 1, it's on the x-axis is sessions, and on the y-axis is percentage of sessions spent on task. And you can see they did a reversal design where they reversed from baseline to intervention, baseline, intervention, baseline, intervention. And during baseline, he was on task anywhere from 40 to 60% of the time. But then during the intervention, he remained on task for 100% of the time during all intervention phases, or all intervention sessions, which is pretty cool. And then if we look at the graph above it, again, on the x-axis is sessions, and on the y-axis is frequency of correct and incorrect responses. And the incorrect responses are the X's, and the correct responses are the filled-in circles. And you can see over time the percentage of correct responses significantly increased, while the incorrect responses remained at a low level, suggesting that using fluency is going to be effective at increasing on-task behavior. So overall, this participant demonstrated an increase in correct responses and a decrease in incorrect responses. In addition, he remained on task for 100% of the time, and this suggests that increases in fluency were accompanied by an increased on-task endurance. And so future research should continue to investigate if fluency has an impact on this endurance, or if there are other variables in play that could have possibly had an impact on his endurance with this. Okay, we're going to move on to our next article. It is Sundberg et al., 2002. I believe you might have it in your readings as 2001. That's a typo. It's actually Sundberg 2002, Contriving Establishing Operations to Teach Man's for Information. So typically developing children between the ages of 2 and 3, they tend to start asking a lot of questions. I don't know if any of you have any children or nieces or nephews or other children that you've worked with that you can see between the age of 2 and 3, they're asking a million questions. What's that? Who's this? Where's that? Always pointing and asking 1,000 questions. Individuals with autism spectrum disorder typically don't engage in this type of behavior at that age, and as a result, they wind up having even more significant language deficits, because as you can imagine, if somebody's asking a lot of questions and demanding for a lot of information, they're going to gain more language skills and more information. But if you're not engaging in these in demanding information, you're not going to get that information. Therefore, you're going to fall further behind from your typically developing peers. So the purpose of this current paper is to teach children with autism to ask the questions where and who. And so another thing that they talked about was establishing operations. Most people are not going to mand for an item or a person or to find out for any type of information unless there's an establishing operation in place. So you're not going to ask where your mother is unless she's missing and you want access to your mother. So they looked at how can we set up establishing operations for children to want to ask where or who. So they conducted 2 experiments to examine the establishing operation and its relation to asking questions. And then in the first experiment, a desired or undesired item was placed in a container and given to a child to remove and play. If he chose to do so. Then the same container was given to the child, but it was empty. And they provided an echoic or imitative prompt that was given and then later faded for the man where blah, blah, blah. So where is the piece of candy? Where is the toy? And a correct response was followed by information regarding the location of the item. And the second experiment involved contriving a new establishing operation following the successful omission of where. So by telling the child that the item was given to a teacher, thereby increasing the value of information regarding the specific teacher's name. And a echoic or imitative prompt was given and later faded for the man who has it. So they would put the item in the box initially, give it to the child, they could play with it, then they would take the item out of the box without the child knowing, give the box back, and the child would open the box and say, oh, where is this item? And then they would have to say, who has this item? A correct response was followed by information regarding the name of the teacher who held the item. So let's go ahead and look at the results in our graph. And you can see for Kevin in figure 1, you can see sessions on the x-axis and percentage correct on the y-axis for mans. In the first tier, you have pin is the closed triangles and giraffe is the open squares. In baseline, he demonstrated 0 instances of responding or mans for this item. And he was manding for where. And then as you can see, there's a pretty significant increase after only a very little amount of sessions to where he's asking where this item is 100% of the time. You see similar responding across the next 2 tiers. He did struggle with asking where the Legos were. Once again, maybe he didn't really care where the Legos were, and maybe there wasn't an EO in place for that. But he did, reach 100% in the session after that. If we go down and look at Billy, you can see also he manded for where's the cup, where's the frog, where's the Viewmaster, and where's the spoon. And he demonstrated an increase in mans for all items. There was a slight decrease with the Viewmaster, but once again, as you can see in most manding sessions, if there's not an EO in place, chances are they're not going to be motivated to mand for that item. So it may not necessarily be that he doesn't have the skill, but it could be that the EO wasn't in place. Overall, the results of these experiments show that children with autism can learn to mand for information when establishing operations are used as independent variables that make information valuable and thus function as conditioned reinforcement. Okay, so we're going to move on to our last article for part 3 of this lecture, which is the Ziomek and Rehfeldt 2008. And they looked at investigating the acquisition, generalization, and emergence of untrained verbal operants from mans acquired using the Picture Exchange Communication System, otherwise known as PECS, P-E-C-S, in adults with severe developmental disabilities. So overall, adults with developmental disabilities often lack functional communication skills and oftentimes aren't taught these functional communication skills early on, and so the older they get, the longer histories of reinforcement they have for problem behaviors, and they're not necessarily taught functional communication skills, and those behaviors aren't more readily reinforced. There's many different ways that you can teach functional communication skills, but the two ways that they compared in this study was using manual sign and using PECS. So there are pros and cons of choosing the difference, choosing manual sign versus PECS. So manual sign is really great because it's autonomous to the individual. It's easier to engage in. You don't have to carry around a clunky binder. You teach the individual the sign, and let's say that you're teaching them how to ask for a drink. You simply just show them how to ask for a drink, and then you can give them the drink. But one of the disadvantages of using manual sign is it's limited to your verbal community that understands the manual signs. So your parents might understand the sign, their guardians might understand the sign, or their immediate caretakers might understand the sign, which is great, but then you take them to McDonald's and they walk up to the worker and they try to sign for a drink, and the McDonald's worker is not going to have a clue what they're asking for. So that's one con to manual sign. And then you have PECS, and what's nice about PECS is in that same example, let's just say that, this is a PEC. In that same example at McDonald's, I can walk up to the worker at McDonald's and I can hand over a picture of, a picture of something that has a cup on it. That's a bad cup. I can hand over a picture of a cup, and they're going to know what it is, and they're going to give me something to drink. So PECS are great because they are universal. Almost everybody can understand the picture, and you can use it with any type, in any type of setting, across any type of person. What's challenging about PECS is typically you have to carry this big binder of PECS. So, let's pretend that this is a binder, and I have to carry this around with me all the time, in addition to anything else that I might need. So here I have my binder of PECS. Then it's a little cumbersome because now I have probably 200 PECS in here. So I'm flipping through, trying to figure out where's the picture I need. Finally, I find my laminated picture in my PEC book. Then I pull it out, and then I can hand it to the person. And so now what do I do with my PEC book? Do I just keep holding on to it? Do I get a little bag and hang it on to me? Or what if I forget my PECS book and I left it at home? Now I don't have any form of communication to use well in the community. So that's one of the cons of PECS. And then in addition, I forgot to mention another con of manual sign is you want to make sure that the individual is going to have the fine motor skills necessary to use that sign. So if they have poor fine motor skills, it's going to be challenging for them to learn the sign, let's say for turtle, or if they want to learn the sign for horse, it's going to be challenging because you need fine motor skills to be able to sign, versus it's not as challenging for me to take a PEC off of a binder and hand it over to a person, because what's nice about PECs is you can make them as big as needed, and even if you have very poor fine motor skills, you can lift that PEC off and typically hand it to another person. So a few things to kind of look at if you're deciding to choose between manual sign and PECS. And then in addition, you'll find out after reading through this article that PECS are typically acquired more quickly than manual sign.